All right, let me ask you something. What if I told you that the deepest hole on the lake, the one spot everyone swears by in January and February, is probably the worst place to be fishing for roach? Sounds crazy, right? We've all been taught to go deep when the ice is thick. But for years, you've been drilling holes, staring at a motionless float, and blaming the weather, the pressure, or just bad luck. Today we're going to expose the huge misunderstanding about winter roach depth. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will understand why you've been blanking, and you'll have a new game plan that could completely change your results. So before we get into it, tell me in the comments, what's the deepest you've ever gone for winter roach? For generations, the logic seemed sound. It's the dead of winter, the water is brutally cold, and the fish's metabolism slows way down. The old wisdom says they retreat to the deepest, most stable water where the temperature hovers right around a cozy 4 degrees Celsius or 39 degrees Fahrenheit. They're trying to conserve energy, so they school up in these deep basins and wait for spring. It's what our fathers and grandfathers taught us. You grab your auger, look at the map, find the deepest depression, and set up camp for the day. It's a ritual, but this ritual is based on a half-truth. It completely ignores the single most important factor for a fish's survival, and it's the reason so many of us are fishing over dead, empty water. Let's set the scene. It's 5 in the morning, still dark, and the cold bites through your layers. You've drilled your first hole right over that 30-foot basin marked on your chart. You drop your tiny jig down, down, down until it taps the bottom. Then you wait and wait. An hour goes by. Nothing. You see other anglers doing the exact same thing 100 yards away. Everyone is chasing the same idea, the same old story about deep water roach. This picture is familiar to almost every single ice angler out there. It's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. The problem isn't your bait and it's not your technique. The problem is that the fish simply are not there. You're sitting on the right lake, but you're fishing in the wrong neighborhood based on outdated information. So why is that deep water a trap? The answer is simple and brutal: oxygen. Or more specifically, the lack of it. Think about what happens in a lake during the winter. Once the ice caps the surface, the water is sealed off from the atmosphere. There's no wind to mix the water and add new oxygen. What little oxygen is in the lake is all the fish have to survive on for months. At the same time, down in those deep basins, there is a constant process of decay. All the dead weeds, leaves, and organic matter from the summer and fall have settled on the bottom. Bacteria go to work breaking all that stuff down, and this process consumes a massive amount of dissolved oxygen. That deep, stable water becomes a dead zone. Now let's think like a roach for a minute. You have two choices. You can sit in slightly warmer but suffocating water where you can't breathe properly, or you can move to slightly colder water that is rich with the oxygen you need to survive. It's a no-brainer. Roach, like most fish, will always prioritize breathable water over a minor temperature advantage. They are not going to hang around in an area where they are struggling for every metaphorical breath. This is the fatal flaw in the go-deep logic. Anglers are targeting temperature stability, while the roach are desperately searching for life-sustaining oxygen. This forces them to completely change their behavior and abandon the very places we've been told to fish for decades. So if they're not at the bottom of the deepest hole, where in the world are they? The answer is they move up. They become suspended fish. Instead of hugging the bottom at 30 feet, they might be holding just 5 or 10 feet below the ice, right over that same deep water. They find a layer in the water column where the oxygen level is comfortable, and they just hang there. Imagine an angler drilling a hole and immediately dropping their lure straight to the bottom. They are literally sending their bait right through the school of fish, and they never even know it. The fish are sitting there high in the column, watching the lure plummet past them into the dead zone below. It's a frustrating image, but it happens all the time. Another place they move is shallower, not super shallow, but shallower than the main basin. Think about large, sprawling flats that are maybe 10 to 15 feet deep, especially if they are adjacent to the deep water. These areas often have better oxygen for a couple of reasons. First, there's less total water volume, so any oxygen that's present is more concentrated. Second, these flats often have leftover, hardy weed growth. Even under the ice and snow, some types of weeds can still perform a tiny amount of photosynthesis on bright days, producing precious oxygen. These weed beds become oases and roach will flock to them. The guy fishing on a 12-foot flat could be outfishing everyone in the 30-foot basin 10 to 1. Let's talk about a real-world example. A few seasons back, I was on a lake known for being tough in the winter. Everyone, and I mean everyone, was clustered over the main 40-foot hole. I watched them for an hour. Nothing. I decided to try something different. I walked over to a big boring-looking flat that was only about 8 feet deep. My buddy thought I was crazy. On my third hole, my flasher lit up like a Christmas tree about 3 feet below the ice. The roach weren't on the bottom. They weren't even in the middle. They were practically touching the ice. I switched to a tiny tungsten jig and barely dropped it in the hole. It was non-stop action for the next 2 hours, while the guys in the deep water never got a single bite. This brings up the most important tool you can have for this kind of fishing, your electronics. A flasher or a fish finder is not a luxury here. It is essential. You simply cannot guess where suspended fish are. When you drill a hole, your first move should be to drop the transducer in and read the entire water column from the bottom of the ice to the lake bed. Don't just look at the bottom 6 inches for a signal. Look for lines and smudges suspended at 10 feet, 5 feet, or even 3 feet. These are the fish everyone else is missing. Without electronics, you are fishing completely blind and are almost guaranteed to fall back into the old habit of dropping straight to the bottom. Now, what if you don't have a fancy flasher? You can still do this, but it requires more work and a different mindset. It's called working the column. After you drill a hole, don't just send your lure to the bottom. Start by fishing 2 or 3 feet below the ice. Give it 5 to 10 minutes. If you get nothing, drop it down another 2 feet. Wait again. Methodically, work your way down a few feet at a time, all the way to the bottom. It's a slower process, but it's the only way to manually search for those suspended schools of fish. Most people don't have the patience for this, which is why the guy who does it is often the one who catches the fish. Another key feature to look for is an inlet or a source of moving water, no matter how small. Even a tiny creek trickling into the lake can be an oxygen magnet. This moving water churns things up and introduces fresh oxygen into the immediate area. Roach will stack up around these spots. The ice might be thinner there, so you must be extremely careful. But if you can safely fish the edge of an area with even the slightest current, you can find a major winter hotspot. It's not about depth, it's about the quality of the water. This is a perfect example of thinking strategically instead of just following the depth contours on a map. Let's debunk another common belief that winter roach are always lethargic and won't move for a bait. While their metabolism is slow, they are not statues. When you find them in an oxygen-rich zone, they can actually be quite active. The reason they often seem so sluggish is that anglers are fishing for them in those low-oxygen deep holes where the fish are just trying to survive, not feed. When you find a school of roach suspended at 8 feet in comfortable water, they will often hit a jig with surprising aggression. The myth of the lethargic fish is often just a symptom of anglers fishing in the wrong place entirely. Finding the right environment is more than half the battle. So, your new strategy for locating winter roach should be a complete reversal of the old one. Instead of starting your search by looking for the deepest water, start by looking for a feature. Your first priority is a large, shallow flat between 8 and 15 feet deep, preferably with some sign of old weed growth. Your second priority is any area with a potential inflow or spring. The deep basin is your last resort, and even when you fish it, you should assume the fish are suspended high above the bottom. This simple change in priorities will put you in more productive water from the moment you step on the ice. You'll spend less time drilling empty holes and more time actually fishing. The gear you use also needs to be adapted for this style of fishing. When you are targeting fish that are only a few feet below the ice, heavy lures and thick line are a huge disadvantage. You need to scale everything down, use a small, sensitive spring bobber or a light action rod that can detect the incredibly subtle bites from these suspended fish. Sometimes all you will feel or see is a slight lift as the fish takes the weight of the jig. Thick line will also cause your tiny jig to hang unnaturally in the water. Switch to 2 or 3 pound test line to give your bait the most lifelike presentation possible. It really does make a massive difference. Let's talk about presentation. When you find these suspended fish, don't jig aggressively. You're not trying to attract them from far away. They are right there. So all you need is a very subtle quiver. Hold your rod as still as possible and just let the jig hang. Then impart a tiny shake with your fingertips, just enough to make the bait vibrate. Pause for a long time, 10 or even 15 seconds. The bite will almost always come on the pause. They will drift over, look at the bait, and gently inhale it. If you are constantly bouncing your rod up and down, they will often ignore it completely. Less is definitely more in this situation. Consider the time of day as well. The old wisdom often says that the bite is best at dawn and dusk. This is true, but for suspended roach, the middle of the day can be a secret weapon. On bright, sunny days, that sunlight penetration can stimulate a small amount of weed growth and oxygen production, and it can make the fish slightly more active. Don't give up if the morning bite is slow. Stay out during that noon to 2 p.m. window, especially over those shallower flats. You might be surprised to find that the bite turns on when everyone else is packing up to go home for lunch. It's another way to zig when everyone else is zagging. It's also important to be mobile. The days of drilling 2 holes and sitting on a bucket from sunrise to sunset are over if you want to be successful. If you mark fish on your flasher and they won't bite after 10 or 15 minutes, move. If you fish a hole at every depth and get nothing, move. Drill a pattern of holes across the structure you want to fish before you even start. This allows you to quickly and quietly hop from one hole to the next, searching for that active school. The anglers who drill the most holes and check the most spots are almost always the ones who end up with a bucket of fish at the end of the day. Let's think about the bait itself. For suspended and often finicky roach, live bait can be a game changer. A single maggot or a waxworm on a tiny tungsten jig is hard to beat. The tungsten allows you to use a very small profile jig that still gets down quickly and keeps your line tight for better bite detection. Don't overload the hook. A single, wiggling maggot looks much more natural than a big ball of them. In some cases, even just the bare hook of a colored jig can be enough. The key is to keep it small, subtle, and natural. You're trying to fool a fish that has a lot of time to inspect your offering. What about the noise and commotion? This is critical when you're fishing shallow. When fish are holding at just 5 feet below the ice, every sound is magnified. Clanking gear on the ice, stomping your feet, or running your auger excessively can spook them and shut the bite down completely. Once you find a productive area, be as stealthy as possible. Clear the slush out of your holes quietly. Walk softly. Try to avoid dropping things. It might seem like overkill, but when you're fishing almost directly on top of the fish, stealth becomes a major factor in your success. You have to be a hunter, not just an angler. This entire approach can be summed up in one phrase: fish for the oxygen, not the depth. It's a fundamental shift in thinking. Instead of looking at a lake map and circling the deepest spot, you should be looking at it and thinking, where are the large, weedy flats? Where are the potential inflows? Where are the transition areas from shallow to deep? These are your new starting points. This is how you break the cycle of failure that plagues so many anglers in the dead of winter. You stop following the crowd that is huddled over the oxygen-deprived basin, and you become a pioneer, searching for the active, comfortable fish that everyone else is missing. Don't be afraid to trust what you see over what you've been told. If your flasher is showing a thick red line 5 feet under the ice, that's where you need to be fishing. It doesn't matter if your grandfather swore they would be at the bottom in 30 feet of water. The fish are telling you where they are. Your job is to listen and adapt. The best anglers are not the ones who stick to a rigid plan. They are the ones who can react to the conditions of the day and the feedback their equipment is giving them. Be willing to abandon old wisdom when modern technology and direct observation are telling you something different. This is the key to unlocking consistently good winter fishing. So, to put it all together, your next trip out, leave the deep basin alone at first. Start on a flat that's between 10 and 15 feet deep. Drill a series of holes. Use your flasher to check the entire water column in each hole, paying close attention to the top half. If you mark fish, drop a tiny tungsten jig with a single maggot down to them. Use a very subtle presentation and be patient. If you don't find them on the flat, then move to the edge of the deep water and repeat the process, still assuming they are suspended. This systematic approach, focused on oxygen-rich zones and the entire water column, is going to dramatically increase your chances of finding and catching winter roach. It's work, but it's smart work. So let's wrap this up. The biggest, most game-changing takeaway here is that roach in the dead of winter are not always where we think they are. The deeper is better rule is a myth, a dangerous one that leads to countless fishless days. The real driver of their location is oxygen. They will abandon the deep, oxygen-poor basins and move up into the water column or onto shallower, weedy flats to find water they can actually breathe. The aha moment is realizing the fish you're looking for might be just 3 feet below your boots, while your lure is 30 feet down on an empty bottom. This discovery should fundamentally change your entire approach. You're no longer just a depth finder, you're an oxygen hunter. Thank you so much for watching. If this video opened your eyes, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more myth-busting fishing content. Now for the big question. After hearing all this, are you going to completely change how you fish for roach this winter? Let me know your new game plan in the comments below.